Week 2 of Pantheon has launched in Destiny 2 with some changes to modifiers and buffs, as well as adding a 5th boss to the rotation, this week being Oryx the Taken King, or Oryx Exalted for the Pantheon rotation itself. Now, if you'd like to learn about the first 4 bosses of Pantheon, I have a Week 1 guide up on the channel already, going over what the mechanics for those bosses are, but in this video, we're going to be talking about specifically Oryx and what entails this week in terms of buffs and modifiers. Now, for this week, there is an increase in difficulty. We are now 10 power under on these bosses instead of 5 like last week for Atrax. On top of that, the surges have rotated as well. Now we're going to be using Stasis Surge and Solar Surge. These 2 affinities are going to be key to doing the most damage to these bosses as you're trying to complete each one. This week, we also got an ability modifier change. Last week, we had Class Warfare. This week, we have Shotcaller. With Shotcaller, if you do primary ammo weapon damage, you can increase the damage output of special and heavy weapons. So just as an example, if you damage a boss with Fatebringer, you can then increase the damage of your Edge Transit. This seems to be a flat 20% damage buff to your weapon, so it's pretty big and should be taken advantage of, especially when you're going in at negative 10 power. So be sure to proc it when you're in boss damage phases. Now moving on to the actual boss fight with Oryx, there are actually several changes in this boss fight, and a couple of them being significant, especially when we get to later weeks where Oryx will be negative 15, negative 20, and so on. Let's start at the beginning. When you first start the Oryx boss fight, normally you're just greeted with a couple of generic knights on the plate near him and in the back. Now, these knights will be Taken Solar Shielded Knights and will also be yellow bars. This is both good and bad because obviously yellow bars will take longer to kill. However, you can also finisher these enemies and can make ammo off of them if needed. The next change is going to be during the Ogre Phase. In this phase, normally what you would do is you would down a Light Eater Ogre, and then simply look for the corresponding knight that spawns diagonally across from that Ogre. So normally you would kill 4 Ogres and then 4 knights. The twist here is that once you've downed the Ogres and the knights start spawning in, each time that you down them, they will continuously keep respawning every 15 seconds or so until your bomb phase is complete. To be more specific, you need to continue to keep running the brand all 3 times, and then eventually your brand holder will slam the knight in the middle to take the shield, and then start the next phase of the boss fight where Oryx will go slam on his plate, and then you need to light up the bombs in order to stun him to do damage. Now, after you've detonated the bombs and stunned Oryx, the Light Eater Knights no longer spawn in. However, you get a new friend to play with during the damage phase. This is going to be a Tormentor spawn during the damage phase of Oryx. Now, normally, I would say a Tormentor is usually a big problem, or something you should actually worry about, but I've noticed that, at least for the Oryx boss fight Tormentor, he kind of just doesn't do anything. I don't know if this is because you have the unlimited aura, the brand that's kind of protecting you in the middle while you're doing DPS, but the Tormentors seem to just kind of walk slowly at you, not really do the charge attack, not do the tornadoes, they just kind of walk. However, if this is a bug and happens to get fixed, or maybe we just had a case study where it's not normal, I suppose, there are easy options to take care of the Tormentor. Remember, these are not boss level Tormentors, so you can CC them. In other words, you can use Strand Shackles, you can use freezing abilities, you can use Tractor Cannon to suppress them and then blind them temporarily. And speaking of Tractor Cannon, that's the next point of this boss fight. I think, in my estimation, you should have a Tractor Cannon player by default on your fire team for this boss fight. It's not because I think this boss fight is only doable with Tractor Cannon, it's for a couple of actual good logical reasons. Number 1, Oryx cannot be tethered. Your tether will do literally nothing to him, so don't waste your time even being on a Night Stalker. A lot of people still don't know this, so I feel like it's a good thing to point out. So, with tether out of the equation, your next logical assumption is going to be, I have to use Tractor Cannon because it's a 30% debuff replacement. Now, on top of this, Tractor Cannon, as I just previously mentioned, can also suppress enemies, and in this case, it can blind the Tormentor and just keep him away from the rest of your fire team while they're doing damage. And after hearing this, some of you may ask, but Sneak, what about Revitalizing Blast in the Artifact mod? Can't you just throw a Solar Melee at Oryx to debuff him? The answer is yes, you can. However, it is a 15% debuff instead of a 30% debuff, and additionally, that will screw you over when you use your heavy weapon, which we're going to talk about next. The heavy weapon, without a shadow of a doubt, for this boss fight, is absolutely Whisper of the Worm. Whisper hits like an absolute truck and is almost handmade and built for this boss fight specifically. Oryx has a gigantic chest that is a giant crit spot. It is super easy to hit. Whisper hits like a truck, gives you ammo back, and you literally will never have to reload until you exhaust all of your ammo. And by the way, if you're all hitting all of your shots, you will either completely one-phase Oryx, or at the very least, get him very low health and close to final stand, and you still won't run out of ammo. Now, going back to the solar melee thing a few seconds ago, the main reason why I don't recommend this over Tractor Cannon is because somebody will eventually have to come out of their Whisper Breathing to throw their melee, then go back into their scope, then wait for Whisper Breathing to proc, and then continue their damage, and you're just wasting valuable seconds of time instead of just keep shooting the boss the entire time while your Tractor Cannon user hits the debuff and then does, let's say, Celestial Nighthawk, or maybe they have Supremacy on with Bait and Switch or Kinetic Tremors, and they just spam that the entire time, and your overall damage is just much larger than what it would be with a 15% debuff. But hey, if that's better for you, by all means, all the power to you. As long as you get the kill, it doesn't really matter. That's just my 2 thoughts. Now, moving on to if you do not one-phase Oryx, one of 2 things will happen. These 2 things are the same things that you would do normally in the original Oryx boss fight, that being Bombs and the Shade of Oryx in the Thunderdome, but these each have a twist in this Pantheon. Should you get the Bomb phase, the bombs will not stop until you down all 4 knights on these plates. These are the same knights that I mentioned earlier, yellow bars with solar shields, so you have to actually use something more than just primary ammo to down them in a quick fashion, otherwise somebody's getting blown up. Now, should you get the Thunderdome phase, where you fight the Shade of Oryx, well, he was kind of busy and learned how to make a Shadow Clone, so now there's 2 Shades of Oryx. Now, these guys aren't too bad right now, aside from just teleporting 8 billion times once you finally get into the Thunderdome, but you should keep note that in later weeks, when it's -15 and -20, these Shades of Oryx probably are going to start one-shotting you, or at the very least make you red bar health, where a Thrall can just melee you to death. So keep that in mind, and make sure that you're not treating this as a joke, and bring in some special ammo that can take care of Oryx. I personally like fusion rifles in this fight. You don't need to scope in and aim a sniper and hope that the Shade of Oryx doesn't teleport, so that's really good. Otherwise, you can always use heavy ammo if you have extra abundance of ammo as well. So just keep in mind, don't treat them as a joke in later weeks. And that is all the changes for the Oryx boss fight within Pantheon. Once again, I just want to reiterate that it is Stasis and Solar Surge, so character-wise and weapon-wise, you should build around those. So like I mentioned, Whisper the Worm, Cartesian Coordinate, Riptide, Zuli's Bane, Well of Radiance, Celestial Nighthawk, things of that nature is going to pump your damage through the roof, and you should absolutely take advantage of that. One last thing before we wrap this up. Hunter players, if you are going to rock Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, which I highly recommend, by the way, please be sure during the damage phase that you are not standing in your team's Well of Radiance. The reason for this is if you fire Goldie inside of Well of Radiance, you will do less damage. Why? Who knows? Spaghetti code. Basically, Well of Radiance, yes, I know the pun here, Well of Radiance actually takes away your Radiant, which means your Goldie will do less damage. Instead, step out of the Well of Radiance, pop your Goldie, or maybe you want to pop it in the well and then step out, doesn't matter, and then shoot your Goldie from outside of the well, and you will do your normal big chunker damage. Then you can go back into the well and shoot your Whisper. And that is all for this week's boss fight and changes. I'll be back next week for the next set of Pantheon, which should be -15 powered with adding Rolk as the final boss. That should go very swimmingly. Definitely won't get kicked in the face and just die in one shot. Nope. In the meantime, if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe today. It does help the channel grow and is much appreciated. We're trying to hit 40K at least before final shape, and it would be very appreciated if you subscribed. Also, if you want to go the extra mile, you can leave a like and or comment below. It does help the channel as well. If you don't know what to comment, you could leave Pantheon as the comment. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.